Equalizing vocals ranges from challenging to rewarding to eventually becoming second nature when you're working on a mix. Using your ears is definitely important, but it helps to know some technical info that's relevant regardless of the performance or the genre. That technical info, combined with the trained ear, gets you to a really comfortable position when you're engineering. So, let's cover some of the technical aspects of equalizing vocals as we consider 4 tips for better vocal equalization. Tip 1. Each processor equalizes the signal. So EQ is thought of as the only processor that equalizes. However, each processor in a vocal chain, including saturation, compression, reverb, delay, and so on, alters the frequency response. Saturators and compressors introduce harmonics, or multiples of fundamental frequencies, as well as some distortion that's not related to the fundamental. These harmonics amplify the range that they occupy. Reverb creates multiple taps of the original signal that decline in amplitude over time. The most recent taps, or the taps that are closest to the original signal, boost the same frequency range as that original signal. Delay does the same thing, and of course these taps could be equalized, but you get the idea. If you're equalizing at the beginning of your vocal chain and you don't understand how so much has been undone by the end of your chain, that's why. Each processor affects the frequency response, just not as purposefully as an EQ, and often in a way that's harder to predict. Tip 2. Why EQ at the beginning of a chain? So with what I just said in mind, why even equalize at the beginning of a vocal chain? If it's going to be undone, then what's the point of starting with EQ? Well, in short, the first EQ in a vocal chain is used to control what is fed into subsequent processors. Although you can't fully balance the vocal with the first EQ, you can ensure that certain ranges aren't exacerbated by saturation, compression, reverb, and so on. For example, say the original vocal has some plosives and rumble, or other unmusical and unrelated aspects. The first EQ lets you attenuate those aspects with a high-pass filter set to below the fundamental frequencies, or maybe the low mids are way too high in amplitude. A bell filter attenuating this range will help balance them before compression. You could also boost some frequencies that you want more of before subsequent processors. For example, if I have a compressor after the first EQ, I could boost a little of 2 to 5 kHz. This way the compressor is working a little harder on this range. When I use makeup gain after compression, that range will be boosted a little bit more and may have a slightly more processed sound. So, the first EQ isn't a remedy for everything that needs to be addressed within the vocal, it's an opportunity to shape it before you build your chain. Tip 3, should you use dynamic EQ or frequency-specific compression? So early on in the chain, de-essing is a useful insert. You don't want to amplify the sibilance with other processors and then have to combat a more aggressive version of it later on in the chain. Now I'd recommend either following your first EQ with a de-esser, or if it's an option, using dynamic EQ to control sibilance. In terms of CPU, adding a dynamic bell filter is comparable to adding another processor for de-essing. So what are the other reasons for picking one over the other? In short, dynamic equalization lets you pinpoint the offending frequencies easier. However, it doesn't let you control the reaction as well as some de-essers. Usually with a multiband compressor or a de-esser, you have some control over the attack and release, whereas this varies from dynamic EQ to EQ. Now personally, I've found that a de-esser works better, but if you like using dynamic EQ for de-essing, I'd recommend trying 2 filters. One narrow filter that's a bandwidth of about 200 to 300 Hz, this one can attenuate more aggressively. Then, situate a gradual bell filter in the general area of the sibilance to control it to a lesser extent. Adjust the center frequency of the 2 bands until you find just the right area for the sibilance. The more accurately you position the filters, the less you'll have to attenuate to achieve the desired effect. So, let's listen to traditional de-essing and then compare it with the technique that I just covered.
Think it was impossible, may have been a bit of trouble. Think it was impossible, may have been a bit of trouble. Think it was impossible, may have been a bit of trouble.
Get professional analog mastering that accurately translates what you hear in your head. Seriously though, when people work with us, they get results. That's why major industry professionals like Keith Urban's producer Aaron Schurz works with us, Grammy award-winning AJ Castillo, Billboard #1 charted artist Megan Lindsay, Grammy award-winning artist Tulis, The Voice singer Cody Ballou, Grammy-nominated producer Tyler Kane, Warner Music artist Ricky Young, and the list goes on. Watch the rest of this video, and at the end, use the link in the description to get direct access to us for personalized analog mastering that accurately translates what you hear in your head. For tip 4, let's understand vocal ranges. Each vocal is different, but there are patterns that you can keep in mind that help a lot with decision making. Now, I conceptualize a vocal as having 7 parts or distinct ranges that work regardless of the vocal or the performance. First, there's the fundamental range. This range includes the fundamental frequency of each performed note. The fundamental frequencies are the building blocks or the foundation for everything higher in frequency. When a fundamental frequency is distorted slightly, which is always the case with a vocalist, since no one sings perfectly formed sine waves, overtones are created. Once you understand the fundamental range, note that everything below it is not musically related. It could be mic rumble, plosives, ambient noise, or other unrelated signal. Next, the second and third order harmonics are associated with fullness, warmth, and if they're too high in amplitude, muddiness. These are the second and third multiples of the fundamental frequency. These harmonics are high in amplitude, and they make up a lot of a vocal's low-mid range. Then we have our 4th, 5th, 6th, and sometimes 7th order harmonics. The 4th and 5th typically include vowel articulation, and depending on the vocalist, can also contain the start of nasal resonances that make a vocalist sound congested. The 8th, 9th, 10th, and potentially 11th harmonics are another vocal formant or a cluster that contains vowel and consonant information. This is in the range that we're most sensitive to, so 2 kHz to 5 kHz. Amplifying this range will increase perceived clarity since the vowel and consonant info in this range will be amplified, making it easier to discern what's being sung. Above this range, between 5 to 12 kHz, we have the percussive aspects of the vocal. Unlike lower frequency harmonics, these aren't tied to the fundamental. They're the unique aspects of the language being sung that contain consonants like T and K, S's, and other percussive information. It's difficult to tie these percussive elements to a note, so they'll rarely be in key with the performance. However, they still make up a large portion of the vocal. They're important for articulation, but quickly become unpleasant, especially in a musical context in which the vocal plays a more tonal role. Lastly, we have the air range, which is everything above the percussive aspects of the vocal. These might be very high-order harmonics of the fundamental. They might be room reflections or other delicate and easily masked parts of the vocal. So, from low to high frequency, these ranges include the unrelated and unmusical, the fundamental range, second and third order harmonics, mid-order harmonics, high-order harmonics, percussive language-specific aspects, and lastly, air. It helps to note that from the fundamental range to the high-order harmonics, everything is related. Almost every frequency is tied to the original sung note and the fundamental. When notes are changed, they all move in unison because they're inherently connected. If you were to sing a solely tonal note, that's a note without any percussive aspects like an ooh sound, that's all you'd have. It's the addition of consonants and sibilants that generates a lot of the 5 to 12 kHz range and the combination of the vocalist with the recording environment that generates both the unmusical and unrelated and a lot of the air frequency range. So, let's take a listen to a vocal as I isolate and affect these ranges. Notice how each one affects the vocal in the intended way, since we're not dealing with strict frequency ranges and instead addressing what's included in the performance.
Think it was maybe of trouble. Think it was impossible. A bit of trouble. Think it was impossible.
Get professional analog mastering that accurately translates what you hear in your head. Seriously though, when people work with us, they get results. That's why major industry professionals like Keith Urban's producer Aaron Schurz works with us, Grammy award-winning AJ Castillo, Billboard #1 charted artist Megan Lindsay, Grammy award-winning artist Tulis, The Voice singer Cody Ballou, Grammy-nominated producer Tyler Kane, Warner Music artist Ricky Young, and the list goes on. Why waste your time creating masters that don't accurately translate what you hear in your head when you could instantly fix a problem by clicking the link in the description and working directly with professionals who have already done what you're trying to do? We've mastered thousands of songs that accurately translate what each client hears in their head, and it'll work for you too. Click the link in the description now and get direct access to us for personalized analog mastering that accurately translates what you hear in your head.